I think it's about time. Okay. Okay, folks, I think we're about ready to begin. Nice to see so many of you on the Erev Pesach. Obviously, you've all made your chicken soup and strudel, whatever you're making. Anyway, we're going to try to take up two of the books of the Bible today that are in very sharp contrast to each other. Those two books are the Song of Songs and Ecclesiastes. Both of them are attributed to Solomon, King Solomon. One of them is assumed to be written by Solomon in his old age, and the other in his youth, and that's why they're so different from each other. One, the Song of Songs, is a love song filled with joy, anticipation, happiness, and the other is the poem of an old man who is dispirited, frustrated with life itself, and terribly concerned with oncoming death. Totally contrasting. In their spirit, both books reflect a real challenge to the men of the Great Assembly who were compiling and canonizing, that is, putting the stamp of approval of holiness on the books. Neither one of those books is really a holy book. And we even have references in the Talmud. If we only had the minutes that would have been taken at the meeting of the men of the Great Assembly, it would be provide a tremendous insight into the Bible, but we don't have that. But we do know that they argued a lot about both of these books, whether to canonize them or not. Easy enough with the Song of Songs, because has nothing to do with religion altogether. It's a story of a young man and a young woman. He's the shepherd, and she really also a shepherdess, who fall in love with each other. That in and of itself is not a new story. What's introduced into the Song of Songs is the mention of Solomon. That's why the book is attributed to Solomon. And Solomon was riding around the countryside and spied this girl. Beautiful. Well, according to tradition, Solomon had 300 wives and 700 concubines. So to spy a pretty girl was for him a successful hunting season. And in back of the minds of everyone, is he going to add her as a trophy to his harem? And she is somewhat torn. She's so in love with this young man, poor, few prospects in life. And on the other hand, tantalizing thoughts about being in the king's court. And how does that belong in the Bible? It belongs on Netflix, but not in the Bible. So the rabbis had to find a reason for the inclusion in the Bible, and they said it's an allegory. It's the story of God and the Jewish people. Now, interesting, in the allegory, who plays the role of God? And who plays the role of the Shunammite, this beautiful woman, and her boyfriend? Well, it doesn't take much of an imagination to assume that Solomon represents God. The beautiful girl represents the Jewish people. God wants this beautiful woman to be his wife or potential wife. So who's the handsome young man, though? Think.
The other people.
What?
The other non-Jewish people, the other non-Israelites.
The non-Jew, right. The heathen. What this young woman and young man share is carnal love, physical love. That's what the Jews found with the heathens. Physical love, representing the crops that they raise, the weather that determines the success of their crops, and what they enjoy in their love for each other. Remember, in the heathens, they always had temple prostitutes. That was an expression of their love. But God demands more than physical love. So that's how they justify the inclusion of the book Song of Songs. What I'm really going to be talking about mostly today is the Rabbi of love. What rabbi in the Talmud became the most eloquent espousal of love? And by that I mean simply human love, which is so brilliantly defined or depicted in Song of Songs. So just for fun, I'm going to see if anybody would venture even a guess as to who's the Rabbi of love in Jewish history, particularly in the Talmud. Any guesses? Well, I'm glad you came here this morning.
We came here to learn.
What?
We came here to learn.
Oh, you came here to learn. That's why I'm glad. Rabbi Akiva, in a number of ways, both in his teachings and in his life, first of all, I'll start with what he says. One of the things that he says. Rabbi Akiva said, "The whole world was only created for the day in which the Song of Songs was written." Why? Because all the writings are holy, but the Song of Songs are the Holy of Holies. Wow. The Bible is holy, but that book is the Holy of Holies. Obviously, he's talking about love, which is what the book is all about. Now, let me tell you the story of his life. He was a shepherd. He worked for the richest man in Israel by the name of Kalba Sabua. Kalba Sabua had a daughter named Rachel. Kalba Sabua had thousands of sheep and goats. And Akiva worked for him. And Rachel used to ride around the estate and saw him and fell in love with him. He didn't dare fall in love with the daughter of Kalba Sabua. There was no point in it. What would she think of a shepherd? But in her great love for him, she finally made a proposal to him. She said, "If you will learn, if you will study," he was illiterate. "If you will study and become a scholar, I want to marry you." Well, he took that challenge. And in the story of his life, he's described as going to Hebrew school with He's 40 years old, by the way, to study with children 5 years old, to learn Aleph Bet. Learned the Aleph Bet, learned how to read, began to read the Bible. He reached a point where in the cheder that he attended, he got to the limit and had to go to yeshiva to become a scholar. So he talked it over with Rachel, and she agreed that he could leave to study in the yeshiva. And he left for 12 years. And he became a scholar and felt that he was ready to come home and to marry Rachel. When he got home, he overheard one of the women in that town where he lived saying, "Did you hear about that sad story of this young man going off and leaving his beloved for 12 years to study in a yeshiva to become a scholar in order to marry her?" Rachel overheard that conversation and said to the woman, if he would go away for 12 more years, it would make me so happy because he would be such a great scholar. When he heard that, he turned around without even greeting Rachel and went away for 12 more years. How true that story is, I don't know. But that's what they tell about him. When he came back, he was accompanied by 12,000 students because by now he was the greatest scholar in Israel. The whole town where he had lived came out to welcome him. And he avoided everybody, made a straight path for Rachel, turned around, and he said to everybody, "Mine and yours are hers." Everything that I accomplished and everything that you are proud of for me, she accomplished. And then they say that he gave her the most beautiful crown to wear for the wedding. It was known as the Jerusalem of Gold crown to express his appreciation. So this is a story of love and sacrifice told about Rabbi Akiva. Then the rabbis in the Talmud tell a famous story about 4 rabbis who entered the Pardes. The Pardes means orchard. And these rabbis are named, all 4 of them. One of them is Rabbi Akiva. And the Talmud said, when they came back from the Pardes, one of them committed suicide. One of the rabbis went mad. one of the rabbis left the country. Only one rabbi came out whole and pure, and that was Rabbi Akiva. Now, what was the Pardes? The Pardes was a term used for Greek learning, philosophy, the learning of Greek philosophers, Socrates, Plato, Aristotle. Hellenism became very common study among Jews. But Hellenism was very corrupting for Judaism. And one of the rabbis, as I said, died, couldn't handle it. Another became ill. Another one fled, isolated himself. Rabbi Akiva was the only one who was able to absorb secular learning and Judaism and remain that rare individual who was a pious Jew and a secular scholar in the sense of Greek learning. A very unique individual. And the last reference to Rabbi Akiva that I want to make, and that reference even became a song. I'll just try to sing it. I can't sing well. Amar Rabbi Akiva. Amar Rabbi Akiva. Amar Rabbi Akiba, Ze klal gadol batorah, Ze klal gadol batorah, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, Ve'ahavta l'reacha L'reacha kabocha. Thus said Rabbi Akiva, this is the great principle of the Torah. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. The concept of loving human beings. Neighbor means other human beings. You have to be able to love people for what they are as human beings. That's, according to Rabbi Akiva, the great principle of the Bible. So there you have it, Rabbi Akiva, who pronounced this principle, who described the Song of Songs as the Holy of Holies of the Holy Bible, and the man who had such great love for his wife Rachel that was driven by that love to become the greatest scholar of his times. So that's what the Song of Songs meant. But just to get the flavor of it a little bit, I just wanted to share with you just a few passages from the Song of Songs. One of the things that's very unique and surprising in Shir HaShirim is that there is an equal intensity to the love expressed by both the man and the woman. He describes her and his feelings for her in the same level as she describes her feelings for him. That's amazing. Because in the Bible, all through the Bible, you have very often emotions that are expressed by men, rarely emotions expressed by women. The man is supposed to be the one who takes the lead in that relationship. It's very hard, if not impossible, to decide who loved each other the most or who expressed it the most vigorously, the most emotionally. As a matter of fact, if you read the book of Song of Songs carefully, and I want to tell you that it's a lot of fun to read it, it's often very hard to tell who is talking. Is it he or she? Sometimes it's built right in. For example, in chapter 4, verse 9, you have captured my heart, my own, my bride. You have captured my heart with one glance of your eyes, with one coil of your necklace. How sweet is your love, my own, my bride. How much more delighted your love than wine. Your ointments more fragrant than any spice. Sweetness drops from your lips, O bride. Honey and milk are under your tongue, and the scent of your robes are like the scent of Lebanon. Vast floods cannot quench love, nor rivers drown it. If a man offered all his wealth for love, he would be laughed to scorn. Let me set thee as a seal upon my heart, like a seal upon your hand. For love is fierce as death. Passion is mighty as Sheol. The darts are darts of fire, a blazing flame. In sharp contrast to Ecclesiastes, love is more powerful than death. Absence is more powerful than closeness. That's the feeling of the young, the passionate description described in Song of Songs. Now, When we get to the book of Ecclesiastes, it's a very different story. Now, the book of Ecclesiastes again begins, I, Kohelet, which is Ecclesiastes, was king in Jerusalem over Israel. I set my mind to study and to probe with wisdom all that happens under the sun. An unhappy business, that which God gave man to be concerned with. We're not talking here about passion or about love. But we're talking about, here we begin with wisdom. As I mentioned before, it's assumed that this was written when King Solomon was in his old age. By now, the passions of his youth have become like cold ashes. And he becomes most noted for his wisdom. Now, wisdom means that he has accumulated knowledge, which means that he has spent his life studying. He studied with a passion because there are always new areas of scholarship that could be undertaken. There's always something on the horizon that could be captured. There's no limit to how much knowledge can be accumulated. And there obviously is a great deal of satisfaction. So he becomes the wisest of men, as the Bible describes him. At the end of a long life of learning, you know, we read about, or we know about people who are writing books for years upon years, to the very moment practically of their death, and they're still writing. One would think that the more you learn, the more you acquire, the happier you should become, because you're so much wiser. Now, for Ecclesiastes, what is it that prevents him from ever really feeling happy about his wisdom? And the answer simply is death. Because there's something that lies ahead that he couldn't achieve, he feels deprived. In a sense, I think about Moses. The great tragedy in Moses' life was that he led his people for 40 years to go to the land of Israel, and then at the very end, wasn't able to do it himself and had to die in exile. This is the sort of fate that Solomon regrets in all human beings. And particularly he talks about wisdom. And he adds, I observed all the happenings beneath the sun, and I found that all is futile and pursuit of wind, a twisted thing that cannot be made straight, a lack that cannot be made good. This is the reaction of a perfectionist. This is the frustration that a perfectionist has. It'll never, ever be perfect. There are always more to do, more to learn, more to accomplish. So the book of Ecclesiastes really is dealing with that theme. The difficulty that human beings have in making peace with the fact that their life is never going to reach all of the goals that are the hope and the dream of that individual. Because he never reached that stage. I said to myself, he said, here I have grown richer and wiser than any that ruled before me over Jerusalem, and my mind has zealously absorbed wisdom and learning. And so I set my mind to appraise wisdom and to appraise madness and folly. And I learned that this too was pursuit of wind. For as wisdom grows, vexation grows. For increased learning is to increase heartache. The inability to accomplish everything in his mind becomes the notion that the whole enterprise was worthless or it was valueless. So, what's the point of becoming a scholar? You'll never know everything. So I said to myself, come, I will treat you to merriment, taste mirth. That too I found was futile. Of revelry I said, it's mad. Of merriment, what good is that? I ventured to tempt my flesh with wine and to grasp folly, while letting my mind direct with wisdom to the end that I might learn which of the two was better for men to practice in their few days of life under heaven. Thus I gathered more wealth than anyone before me in Jerusalem. In addition, my wisdom remained with me. I withheld from my eyes nothing they asked for, denied myself no enjoyment. Rather, I got enjoyment out of all my wealth, and that was all I got out of my wealth. Then my thoughts turned to all the fortune my hands have built up, to the wealth I had acquired and won. And oh, it was all futile and pursuit of wind. There was no real value under the sun. Everything became boring. There are all kinds of pleasurable things that people do, but you can't keep it up forever and enjoy it. One reason that probably happened to him as well was simply that age had made it impossible to do the things that he enjoyed doing for so many years. But the other thing is that even that activity alone no longer provided the joy that it provided in earlier years. Didn't spare anything in terms of pleasure, but that itself was not enough and never would be enough. So listen to how he feels. So too, I loathed all the wealth that I was gaining under the sun, for I shall leave it to the man who will succeed me. That's another of the emotional problems that he faces with death. Don't forget, certainly in those days, the lifespan was much shorter than it is today. And the thought that all that he has gained is pretty soon going to pass to somebody else's hands is more than he can handle. He not only cannot learn everything, he cannot enjoy everything, but he can't do it forever. I don't know, something like the man who talked about a certain restaurant. He didn't enjoy the food, and they didn't even give him seconds. This is the way he felt about life.
But Rabbi,
Yep.
part of what he says after that, though, is that it's also that he doesn't know if the person who will inherit it will be foolish or wise and do well with what he accumulated. And so that bothers him.
You know,
It's not just
in connection with that, I would say this. From my awareness, one of the reasons that people do work hard and do acquire wealth is the anticipation that they will have that to give on to their children and grandchildren and their descendants. He obviously doesn't derive any pleasure from children. For him, dying and leaving it to his son is a loss, a great loss. We go on with him.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
so why is this book canonized then?
Oh, okay. You're coming. You anticipated me. So why is this book canonized? Well, generally the explanation is it's canonized for the way it ends. In the same way that the book of Job is canonized for the way it ends. In other words, the book of Ecclesiastes and the book of Job, neither of them really should have been canonized. One of them says, the book of Job, there really isn't the kind of God that we believe in. Because the kind of God that we believed in is the kind of God that is just, that is loving, that forgives. But the God of Job is not just. He does terrible things that are totally unjustified. So how do you include the book of Job in the canon? And the answer is, well, you just didn't understand what's going on. But in the end, God actually shows his love for Job and rewards him doubly for all that he's done. And that's how the book of Ecclesiastes ends. Take a look. Just as you do not know how the life breath passes into the limbs, doesn't that sound like Job? You don't know You don't understand how a person becomes alive. Into the limbs within the womb of the pregnant woman, so you cannot foresee the actions of God who causes all things to happen. Sow your seed in the morning and don't hold back your hand in the evening, since you don't know which is going to succeed, the one or the other, or if both are equally good. He actually spells out the answer to your question, which Job doesn't really spell out. In other words, what really God is saying, or what Ecclesiastes is saying, and this is a question that people think about. What do you know about what goes on after death? How do you know that it's not the best of times? Why do you feel so terrible about dying? Why assume that it's a terrible end to a very good life? In a sense, that's what both of them are saying. It's very difficult to assure anyone, including oneself. It's very difficult to make death appealing. What you can try to do in these biblical books is to say, don't assume the worst about death. It seems to me that when people think about death, they think about darkness, nothingness. It may not be that way, you don't know. They apparently feel that it's a little bit easier to accept that than to simply live in fear of death. The book of Ecclesiastes also contains one other aspect that I want to refer to. Oh, here it is. One of the most famous passages in Ecclesiastes is the nature of time. There is a time for being born and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting the planted, a time for slaying and a time for healing, a time for learning, tearing down, and a time for building up, a time for weeping and a time for laughing, a time for wailing and a time for dancing, etc. There's a whole list like that. What Ecclesiastes is trying to convey by that and in a way, he is trying to help us accept the inevitability of death. And he does it by this. And I think psychologically it's a brilliant idea. When people are obsessed with the idea of death, when they feel, as Ecclesiastes himself says, that nothing is worthwhile because nothing is permanent. Everything disappears. He comes along and tempers that notion by saying, you know what? You've got a long time in which there are so many things to do to keep your mind occupied that death should not be on your mind all the time. There'll be a time for joy, and there will be a time for sorrow. That's the nature of life. Absorb your mind with life, with time, not with death. He's not contradicting himself, but what he's saying is there is a threat to people to become depressed. One of the primary sources of depression is the thought of death. What's the point? And he outlines the nature of life is such that if you really are living, you're going to be busy all the time. You'll have time for this, time for ripping apart, a time for sewing, a time for silence, and a time for speaking. There's a time for meditation. There's a time for conversation. We have to take advantage of all of these opportunities to use time. I'm thinking to myself, as if I have a son, Mayor, who a very busy professional life in the medical field, and every year takes off about 3 weeks of silent meditation. And when I asked him about it, how do you feel doing it? He said, it's the most refreshing activity that I have all year. And I said, refreshing? He said, yes. There's a time for everything, all kinds of activities, to keep your mind occupied. When you realize that, then you won't subject yourself to the depression that comes with overwhelming thoughts of death. So it's a very complex book of Ecclesiastes. It reflects the complexity of human thinking. You know, from one day to the next, we can go through a complete change of thought. We even think about our good days and our bad days. Some days when we think we can do anything, and other days when we can't do anything. Well, that's a little frightening. People can worry about what kind of a day is it going to be. But if you remember that there's a time for everything, and there are even bad things can be very good for you if you determine to do something to counter the bad, to accept the bad as a challenge, rather than simply succumb to it. This is what Kohelet, or Ecclesiastes, is trying to convey. That if we think about it, we can be the masters of our time and not the subjects of our time. We don't have to give in to the time that exists, but we can use that time in order to accomplish whatever goal that we have. So, what a total difference between Kohelet and Song of Songs. Again, to come back to the canonization, I think they deliberately put in books which reflect the variety of thinking of human beings, rather than just strengthening one aspect of that thought. So, comments or questions? Al?
Rabbi, is the book of Kohelet read in the synagogue in its entirety? And if it is,
What?
Does the book of Kohelet, is it read in the synagogue during the year?
Yes.
When?
Sukkot.
Okay.
On Sukkot. I'm glad you didn't ask me why. Okay, any other questions or comments about either one of these books? Well, let me just out of curiosity ask you, hopefully you've read them, but at least now after we discuss them, which of these two books do you enjoy the most? How many of you vote for Song of Songs? You like happiness, right? How many of you vote for Kohelet, Ecclesiastes? You like thoughtfulness. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Well, next week is our last week, and we're going to take up Psalms and Jonah.
There's one more question.
Oh, another question?
Yeah, Rabbi, I was just going to mention that
Hold it right to your lips, please.
I believe both of them, in their own way, the outcome is the expression of optimism that I think is a theme throughout our Bible. And so I see them as both as very valuable lessons of what Jews believe.
That I agree with you, and thank you. That's true. There are truly valuable lessons to be derived. Okay, we'll meet next week.